When the bombs stopped falling and the Allied troops advanced through the ruins of the Third Reich, they thought they had won the war. But what they found behind German lines was more terrifying than any battle. Hidden laboratories, secret archives, human experiments, sealed chambers that should never have been opened. The documents the regime tried to destroy, the testimonies of horror whispered by survivors, and the dark scientific projects that bordered on the inhuman. This is not just a story of soldiers and battles. It is a journey into the depths of a machine obsessed with absolute control, racial purity, and world domination. And what came to light after 1945 still shocks the world to this day. Get ready to learn the most disturbing discoveries of Nazi Germany, secrets that time has failed to bury. Nazi Germany's most disturbing discoveries revealed after the Second World War. During World War II, one of the top priorities for the warring sides, and especially for the Third Reich, was to keep strategic routes, movements, and installations absolutely secret. This obsession with concealment led to the intensive use of camouflage and construction methods in remote or subway locations. Natural caves adapted as warehouses, tunnels dug deep, armored and sealed trains carrying sensitive material, and logistical complexes hidden in mountainous areas or in the middle of dense forests. The slogan was clear: hide everything from the enemy, even from the closest allies, and prevent any operation from being traced or interrupted. The idea was simple but extremely effective. If the enemy could not see or know where the logistical or technological heart of the war machine was, then he could not attack it. Thus were born secret weapons development centers, hidden supply depots, command shelters, and experimental laboratories that operated completely off the radar of enemy intelligence. At the end of the war in 1945, with the defeat of the Third Reich and the Allied occupation, many of these facilities were abandoned. Some sites were deliberately sealed, others simply forgotten in the chaos of surrender. Documentation mentioning them was destroyed or fell into the hands of intelligence agencies that decided to keep the information secret. And so these structures fell into oblivion. No one set foot in them again. No one claimed them. However, over the years, they began to reappear. Sometimes by chance, a hiker, an amateur archaeologist, a mountaineer, or a farmer digging in the earth, and sometimes thanks to modern technology such as ground-penetrating scanners or high-resolution satellite images. What was surprising was not simply finding a tunnel or a cave, but the contents that were still there, unaltered. These were not modern recreations or vestiges deteriorated by time. What emerged were real objects, many of them in an astonishing state of preservation. Military vehicles covered in rust but recognizable, weapons still loaded, complete uniforms, hand-marked tactical maps, sealed official documents, and even entire subway structures that preserved ventilation systems, furniture, and technical mechanisms. Some of these finds seemed frozen in time, as if their occupants had left for a moment with the intention of returning and never came back. Everything remained silent for decades. The jungles grew over them, the snow covered them, the earth hid them, but it did not destroy them. And when they finally came to light, they did so as direct witnesses of a story that continues to reveal secrets many years after the last shot. Each find raises new questions. What exactly was being done at these sites? Who was there? What was left untold? These structures and objects not only offer new pieces to the complex puzzle of World War II, but also remind us that the past never completely disappears. It remains hidden, waiting to be discovered. And when that happens, it doesn't need many words. It speaks for itself. The forgotten Soviet bunker in Latvia. With the fall of the Soviet bloc in the 1990s, several groups of explorers began investigating abandoned military installations in Eastern Europe. One such find occurred near the town of Skrunda in Latvia. What appeared to be a group of empty structures hid something much deeper. Underground, a network of reinforced tunnels, sealed rooms, and rusted machinery had remained untouched since the end of World War II. The entrance to the complex was covered in dirt and rubble. Only a slight incline in the ground suggested anything unusual. After removing the top layer, a steel gate with traces of red paint appeared, clogged with rust. After several attempts, they managed to open it. The interior was dense, smelling of rust and ancient dust. The corridors descended in a straight line for about 10 meters. Inside were at least 4 large rooms connected by narrow corridors. Loose wires, broken pipes, and lingering damp covered almost everything, although some items remained incredibly well preserved. In one room, metal shelves contained boxes of tools, electrical spare parts, maps marked in Russian, and technical manuals. In another, a communications room still displayed metal wall panels, old telephones, microphones, and control consoles. Many items retained their original labels. Notebooks with duty rosters, encrypted codes, and air raid protocols were also found, along with a Soviet typewriter with written sheets discussing drills, maintenance, and operational orders. In a more secluded area, behind a locked steel door, a small armory was found. While no complete weapons or ammunition were found, there were magazines, racks, and rifle parts. Everything was documented but not extracted. The complex had artificial ventilation systems. Some pipes were still connected to the roof. Also found were the remains of an emergency generator and a makeshift dormitory with metal bunk beds, rotting mattresses, metal plates, a hanging lamp, and a broken portable radio. Everything indicated that the site had been occupied for prolonged periods. Experts who later investigated concluded that it was an operational bunker active between 1944 and 1947, possibly used during the last months of the conflict and then exploited by Soviet forces. The location, hidden but close to a former airfield, gave it a strategic value. It was a communication or command point, ready to act in any eventuality. The site did not appear in official records or maps accessible to the public. It was discovered by chance by civilian explorers. Years later, university researchers analyzed it further. Although some areas were collapsed, telescopic cameras revealed the presence of structures similar to warehouses or archives, which remained unexplored for security reasons. Today, the Skrunda bunker remains sealed and classified as a historical site, although it is not open to the public. Its discovery supports the theory that multiple secret command centers existed in Eastern Europe during the last years of the conflict and the beginning of the Cold War, many of which were deactivated without a trace. The field hospital hidden in a French cave. In 2012, a group of speleologists were exploring a series of caves in northern France near the Ardennes region when they found an entrance partially covered by vegetation and earth. At first, it looked like just another cavity among so many rock formations in the area, but something about its structure caught their attention. The ground inside was artificially leveled, and the walls showed obvious marks of human intervention. There were metal hooks embedded in the stone, traces of chalk still visible, rotting planks that once served as reinforcements, and the remains of stacked sandbags. It was not a natural cave. It had been adapted for a specific purpose, almost urgently. As the exploration progressed, clearer clues began to emerge. First, rusty medical objects appeared, unused syringes wrapped in wax paper, a folding stretcher still assembled in a corner, and wooden boxes with inscriptions in English such as "Medical Supplies, U.S. Army." Then they found empty morphine bottles, yellowed bandages, broken medical alcohol bottles, and in a side compartment several uniforms with U.S. Army insignia, mostly belonging to the Medical Corps. Everything indicated that the site had functioned as a makeshift field hospital during World War II. What was most surprising was not only the find, but the state of preservation. The constant humidity, combined with the total lack of direct sunlight and the stable temperature of the subsoil, had created an ideal microclimate for preserving many of the objects. Nothing had been looted or disturbed. The site seemed suspended in time, as if it had been abandoned in the midst of an urgent retreat and then forgotten for nearly 7 decades. The internal layout of the space revealed careful organization. There was an entrance area with guard signs, 2 rooms with metal stretchers arranged in a line, a makeshift operating table on drums and planks, and a small kitchen area equipped with basic utensils, sealed food cans, water bottles, and campfire remnants. Also found were kerosene lampstands, rudimentary surgical instruments, military boots lined up against a wall, and a damaged portable radio with the frequency panel still visible. The find offered more than just a collection of ancient artifacts. It was a raw and intact reflection of life in extreme conditions. Death was fought there without weapons, with gauze, scalpels, and scarce morphine. Every corner narrated the efforts of doctors and nurses to keep wounded soldiers alive in the middle of the front. The silence and isolation of the cave provided an almost overwhelming emotional dimension, the echo of a past that had been locked underground. After confirmation of its authenticity, local authorities and US Army experts organized a discreet archaeological mission to recover the artifacts and document the site. Many of the materials were taken to museums specializing in military medicine, while others were held in custody for scientific analysis. A commemorative plaque was placed near the original access, recalling the courage of the medical personnel who worked there under impossible conditions. This type of finding allows us to understand a less visible dimension of war, the one that is not fought with bullets but with bandages and urgent decisions between life and death. Amidst the brutality of the fighting, there were also corners of humanity buried under layers of silence waiting to be discovered. Legacy hidden underground. These discoveries, both the bunker in Latvia and the field hospital in France, show a silent but crucial facet of World War II, the subway warfare, the invisible shelters, and the vast secret infrastructure that accompanied each military operation. Far from the massive bombardments, the tanks crossing ruined cities, or the landings on fortified beaches, there was another, more hidden, more discreet, but no less decisive scenario. The one that took place underground, between dark tunnels, armored corridors, and rooms hastily dug out of the rock. Beyond the visible battlefields, there was a world hidden beneath the surface. There, war was fought on another plane, that of logistics, protection, strategic planning. In those spaces, officers wrote coded orders with hands trembling from cold or exhaustion. Doctors treated the wounded without sufficient anesthesia. Engineers studied coded maps by the light of flashlights, and soldiers, barely asleep, prepared to return to a front where tomorrow was never certain. The damp walls bore witness to conversations that went unrecorded, to decisions made in the gloom, to moments of doubt, fear, and determination. Hanging wires carried voices between scattered commands, connecting remote points in the rear with forward units. Rudimentary fans whirred in the gloom to renew the stale air, and in a forgotten corner a soldier scribbled in his notebook, not knowing if those words would ever be read. Each object had an urgency behind it. A lamp made from scraps of metal, a makeshift cot made from cargo tarpaulins, a box of essential medicines rationed down to the last milligram. Everything spoke of a life in pause, suspended between duty and survival. Today, these constructions, abandoned for decades, reappear as time capsules. They are windows to a past that is not told in school books but is discovered step by step, amid dust, rust, and silence. Each corner contains a suspended story, a rusty stretcher that still preserves dry stains as traces of what it was, a closed metal box swollen by humidity with documents that time almost erased, a broken lamp that once illuminated the fear and hope of those who took refuge there, and on the walls, barely visible inscriptions, dates, names, drawings, perhaps the last attempts to leave a mark. These spaces were not meant to last. They were functional, transitory, hidden by necessity. There was no time for aesthetics, only for the urgent. And yet, oblivion protected them. Dirt, mold, and silence sealed those places like a tomb that did not want to be opened. But now, when they come to light again, they force us to look at the war from another angle, not as a spectacle of great battles, but as a sum of moments contained in small and dark places where lives were decided in silence. There, where heroism had no medals, where resistance was to attend to a wounded man without electricity, to keep a radio signal operational, or simply to resist one more day. The discovery of these sites is more than an archaeological find. It is a recovery of memory, a way to connect with those who passed through, invisible to official history, but fundamental to understanding the human, technical, and emotional dimension of a conflict that still casts long shadows over our present. Because the war was not only fought in the air or in the open fields, It was also fought underground, in the echo of forgotten tunnels where every decision, however small, could mean the difference between life and death. And it is there, in that historical subsoil, where a hidden fragment of the 20th century continues to beat, not to glorify the past, but to understand it, to listen among the silence and the dust, to the voices of those who are no longer here but whose footprints still mark the ground we walk on. The Cave Hospital of Las Ardenas. During the fighting in the Ardennes, everything indicated that a cave hidden in a wooded area had been used by an American medical squadron. On one of its walls, one could still read, written in charcoal, the date December 17, 1944, coinciding with the beginning of the German offensive in that region. That winter was particularly harsh. Temperatures below -20 degrees Celsius, intense blizzards and a thick fog that made visibility difficult. Many Allied units, surprised by the enemy advance, were forced to retreat and set up temporary posts in makeshift shelters, such as abandoned churches, ruined barns or natural caves like this one. The cave, about 30 meters deep and difficult to access, was partially hidden among centuries-old trees and rock formations. It was only thanks to a landslide caused by seasonal rains that the entrance became visible decades after the end of the war. Local explorers noticed the anomaly and alerted the authorities, never imagining that they were about to discover a fragment frozen in time. Years later, a declassified US military report confirmed that a field medical team had indeed set up an emergency hospital there to treat wounded soldiers on the front line during the so-called Battle of the Bulge, one of the bloodiest of the conflict. The team consisted of at least 3 doctors, several nurses, logistics operators, and 2 ambulance drivers. Their mission was clear: to provide immediate care to the wounded without the need for long and dangerous transfers to rearguard hospitals exposed to shelling or ambushes. Numerous traces of that presence were found inside: rusty canvas stretchers, bandages still rolled up, metal syringes, empty penicillin and morphine bottles, a kerosene lamp, the remains of military ration wrappers, and a useless field radio. Most revealing was a small bundle of handwritten medical notes, protected by an aged leather folder. The sheets were neatly organized: patient's name, age, military unit, quick diagnosis, date of admission, and type of treatment received. In some cases, doctors had left personal annotations, such as probable evacuation tomorrow or very serious, remained stable. A handwritten diary, attributed to one of the doctors, also appeared with entries dated between December 18, 1944 and January 3, 1945. His words, brief but telling, revealed the harshness of the conditions under which they worked: candlelight surgeries, frostbite on the hands, shortages of basic supplies, and the constant threat of the Germans discovering their location. On one page he wrote, "Last night we lost 2 boys. We had nothing but wet blankets. Cold is the silent enemy." In another, more hopeful entry, he noted, "One of the wounded smiled again today. We gave him a piece of chocolate that someone had saved from Normandy." Despite the fact that no human remains were found, the complexity of the facility indicated that it was not a makeshift temporary shelter, but a field facility designed to operate for several weeks. There was a reception area, a small rudimentary kitchen area, a section dedicated to operations, and another for staff rest. Everything was arranged in a functional and military order. The entrance had been carefully camouflaged with branches, hardened mud, and native vegetation, which explained why it was never detected by enemy patrols or previous explorers. The find was immediately reported to local authorities and the US Army. A technical team was sent to the site to document the structure. The walls were digitally scanned, high-resolution photographs were taken, and the most significant objects were carefully extracted. Some were sent to conservation laboratories, while others were transferred to a military museum in France, where they are currently on display along with a partial replica of the cave's interior. The discovery was considered of high historical and symbolic value. It not only evidenced the American presence at one of the most critical moments of the Western Front, but also revealed a little explored facet of the conflict, the silent struggle for life amidst the chaos of war. While tanks roared and shells exploded outside in that hidden corner of the earth, a small group of people fought every day to preserve something more precious: humanity. Researchers concluded that the hospital cave was a key medical support point in the heart of the battle, a forgotten piece of the Allied logistical puzzle. Today, converted into a site of historical interest, it remains closed to the public for preservation, but its history, rescued from silence and cold, lives on through objects, writings, and the testimony of those who risked their lives not to take it but to save it. The Japanese chest with the last words of war. In 2017, while carrying out widening work on a secondary road near the coast of Okinawa, a group of workers stumbled upon what appeared to be a metal box buried half a meter deep. At first, they thought it was an old tool forgotten by time, rusted and covered with dirt. But when they cleaned the top, they noticed something unusual: inscriptions in Japanese precisely engraved on the lid. They alerted the local authorities, and within days a team of archaeologists and military history experts took charge of the find. The box was taken to a specialized laboratory to be opened. Despite the accumulated rust, the seal remained intact. What they found inside exceeded all expectations. There were envelopes carefully wrapped in rice paper, small personal items, such as medals, Shinto amulets, photographs of family members, pieces of cloth with embroidered names, and a small folded Japanese flag filled with handwritten messages. Everything was surprisingly well preserved, protected by darkness, stable humidity, and the silence of more than 7 decades. The documents were dated between April and June 1945, in the last and most desperate months of the war in the Pacific. They were letters written by young soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army stationed in Okinawa, one of the bloodiest battles of the entire conflict. They were not military reports or official orders. They were intimate words, personal messages addressed to mothers, sisters, friends, or even to whoever might read them in an uncertain future. Some were written with careful calligraphy, others with hasty strokes that betrayed urgency. Some letters contained drawings, small poems, or farewell phrases. One of them read, "If anyone finds this, know that we fought for what we believed was right. Don't forget that we were also afraid." Another, briefer, simply said, "My name is Taro. I am 19 years old. I am burying this because I don't know if I will be alive tomorrow." The box was identified as a kind of makeshift time capsule, probably buried shortly before the soldiers were mobilized to the front. Thanks to the inscriptions and names, historians were able to identify 9 of the signers. Most of them died during the battle or disappeared without a trace. Only one was confirmed as a survivor. At the time of the discovery, he was over 90 years old and living in Tokyo. He was contacted by the investigation team, and when he saw one of the letters, he recognized his own handwriting. The veteran confirmed that he and his comrades decided to bury the box in what had been a makeshift subway shelter near a line of trenches. They did so as an act of remembrance, knowing that surrender was a matter of time. "We wanted to leave something of our own, in case we didn't come back, so that someone would know what we were thinking, what we were feeling at the time," he said in a recorded interview. The find offered no military secrets or strategic data. It didn't talk about weapons or battles, but it revealed something much more valuable: the humanity of those who participated in a war that consumed them from a very young age. Their letters spoke of small dreams, having a rice store, marrying their neighbor, seeing the sea again from the port of Nagasaki, simple illusions that went down with them in a conflict that seemed to have no end. The discovery was widely documented and generated a strong impact on the local community. A temporary exhibition was organized at a museum in Okinawa, where replicas of the letters, personal items, and a video of the veteran's testimony were displayed. The exhibition was well attended, especially by students, many of whom confessed that they did not know details of this part of the story. For them, the finding was a revelation. The war is not only told in figures or military strategies, but also in trembling words written by a 19-year-old who did not know if he would see the next dawn. That box, buried in silence, ended up becoming one of the most poignant pieces of Japanese memory of World War II. The ghost plane in the desert. In 2012, an Egyptian worker exploring a remote region of the Sahara Desert stumbled upon something out of the ordinary. An ancient airplane, partially covered by sand, as if it had recently made an emergency landing. It was not destroyed or buried, just eroded by the sun and wind. The fuselage remained intact, and it was still possible to make out part of the serial number. Around it were rusted weapons and personal belongings. It was a British Curtiss Kitty Hawk P-40 fighter used by the Royal Air Force during World War II in North Africa. Investigations revealed that the aircraft had taken off in June 1942, with 24-year-old Sergeant Dennis Copping in command. His mission was to move the aircraft for repairs, but it never reached its destination. The original flight report stated that it had become disoriented and was written off as lost. No signs of impact, radio transmissions, or human remains were found. The condition of the aircraft indicated that the landing was forced but controlled. The landing gear was damaged, the windshield broken, but the rest of the aircraft remained in one piece. Inside the cockpit, several original instruments, the radio, although unserviceable, a military cap, a tool case, and a canteen were preserved. There was also scattered ammunition, a sun-dried parachute, and empty fuel cans. Everything indicated that the pilot, after making an emergency landing in the middle of the desert, tried to survive on his own. However, the extreme conditions of the Sahara sealed his fate. The discovery of the British fighter was one of the most impressive discoveries in the history of military aviation, not only because of the remarkable state of preservation of the aircraft, but also because of the human story it evoked, the disappearance of a young pilot who left no trace until his aircraft emerged almost intact 70 years later, like a capsule frozen in time. At first, no human remains were found at the site. However, that triggered a thorough investigation by British historians and experts. Military archives, mission records, flight routes, and active squadrons in the area were reviewed. All the clues led to Sergeant Dennis Copping, who would have decided to land before running out of fuel after becoming disoriented. He then reportedly set off on foot in search of help. Several kilometers from the plane, human bones were found next to a makeshift rock shelter, remnants of military clothing, a revolver, and fragments of tarpaulin. It is believed that Copping walked to the limit of his endurance, never reaching an inhabited area. The condition of the fighter was so impeccable that it looked like a museum piece planted in the middle of the desert. Every detail was documented. Fragments of the fuselage were scanned, precise coordinates were taken, and hundreds of photographs were recorded. For weeks, British and Egyptian teams analyzed the site and the environment. The British government expressed interest in recovering the aircraft for display in a museum, but the remote location, lack of roads, and risk of damage led to consideration of keeping it on site. Covering it with protective materials was considered to prevent further deterioration. However, over time, the aircraft was dismantled by looters who removed parts from the fuselage and internal components. Today, only scattered fragments remain where it once rested whole. After the identification of the human remains, Dennis Copping was officially honored by the British Army. Until that time, he had no known grave. His name was inscribed in the records of fallen soldiers in Africa, and his story was immortalized in the archives of the Royal Air Force. The so-called ghost plane of the Sahara became a mute testimony of a seemingly simple mission that ended in tragedy and an enigma that remained buried for 7 decades. The submarine. I-52, the lost Axis shipment under the Atlantic. During the Second World War, the seas not only served to transport troops and weaponry, they were also routes for clandestine operations. One of the most unusual cases remained hidden at more than 5,000 meters of depth under the Atlantic. It is the Japanese submarine Y-52, whose cargo and mission revealed a strategic collaboration between Japan and Nazi Germany in the final stage of the conflict. At that point of the war, sailing through conventional routes was a death sentence. The Allied forces dominated the Atlantic, and any undetected movement was almost impossible. However, both Germany and Japan needed to continue exchanging vital resources. Germany required raw materials that were already scarce in Europe: rubber, tin, tungsten, molybdenum, quinine, and even opium. In exchange, Japan sought German technology, airplane blueprints, torpedoes, radars, and any innovation that could give them an advantage on the Pacific front. The I-52 departed from Japan, heading to the port of Lorient on the French coast, controlled by the Nazis. Its cargo included about 2 tons of gold in ingots, strategic metals, drugs, and high-value products. In exchange, the Japanese hoped to return with state-of-the-art military equipment. To increase the probabilities of success, the submarine had to meet in the middle of the Atlantic with the U-530, a German submarine that would deliver advanced radar systems to improve its evasion capacity. Nevertheless, the plan was frustrated by the United States Naval Intelligence, which had managed to intercept the communications of the Axis. On June 24th of 1944, anti-submarine airplanes of the United States Navy detected the position of the I-52 and launched an offensive with depth charges. The submarine was sunk with its entire crew on board. It was lost without leaving a trace in an abyssal zone, and for decades its history was a subject of rumors, theories, and speculation. In the decade of the 1990s, a private team of submarine explorers located the remains of the I-52 southwest of the Azores. The images obtained with submarine robots revealed that the hull still remained in relatively good condition, considering the time elapsed. It was confirmed that part of the cargo was still inside. The boxes with gold ingots were visible, although unreachable due to the extreme conditions of the environment. The pressure of the water, the depth, and the technical costs prevented any recovery attempt. The I-52 became a symbol of the last desperate efforts of the Axis to keep its alliance alive even when everything seemed lost. It also demonstrated how, in parallel to the Great War confrontations in Europe and the Pacific, there were secret missions in which what was crucial were not the shots, but the strategic exchanges that fed the war machinery from the shadows. Although the remains of the submarine remain at the bottom of the ocean, the submarine recordings confirm its existence and the value of its content. It is one of the few documented cases in which a submarine loaded with gold had a precise mission between 2 Axis powers. It was not only a transport, but a high-level operation designed to sustain an alliance that was collapsing. The Nazi time capsule: indoctrination and memory in Swosieniec. In 2016, during some restoration works in an old school of the small Polish village of Swosieniec, a surprising finding came to light: a time capsule buried by the Nazis in 1934, schoolbooks, insignias, and documents. Inside it were found newspapers, schoolbooks, insignias, and documents that revealed how the regime sought to shape the youth through education and propaganda. The newspapers found, mostly from 1934, contained news about the Nazi regime, speeches of Hitler, and propagandistic texts. Pamphlets used for youth indoctrination and schoolbooks employed in the history classes of that era were also recovered. Among the most outstanding elements were medals of the Nazi Party and leaflets that mentioned the oath that students had to make to Hitler. Likewise, documents with the names of the students of that year were identified, which allowed a better understanding of the role of the building as a center of ideological formation. The Polish authorities pointed out that the finding possessed a remarkable historical value. It was not a simple accumulation of objects, but a time capsule intentionally created. The Nazis had buried it, knowing that someday it would be discovered, with the purpose of preserving their ideas and vision of the world. Old German archives mentioned the existence of this capsule in the school, but its exact location had not been confirmed until now. The Museum of Szczecin dedicated several months to the restoration and analysis of the objects. Once processed, they were exhibited in a special display that attracted thousands of visitors and received international coverage. Beyond its documentary value, the emotional impact was considerable. To see objects intact after more than 70 years caused a strong impression. What stood out the most was the contrast between the everyday elements, such as pencils, books, and coins, and the ideological symbols, insignias, proclamations, and images of the regime, which showed how the Nazi propaganda was integrated into all aspects of daily life. The discovery also made it possible to establish links with similar findings in the region. It was corroborated that during the expansion of the Third Reich, many schools and public buildings hid time capsules as part of projects promoted by the Hitler Youth and other institutions of the party. Several of the documents found were digitized to facilitate their study and public consultation. Among them were personal letters written by students in school notebooks, where they repeated party slogans as part of their tasks. This type of evidence offered a clear vision of indoctrination from childhood. The capsule was placed in a specially conditioned display case inside the museum, with temperature and humidity control to guarantee its long-term conservation. This finding renewed the interest in examining other construction archives of the Nazi period in the region with the hope of finding more hidden capsules. In addition, it promoted new research about the pedagogical methods of the Third Reich, since the content found provided direct evidence of what was taught in the classrooms. The small village of Swosieniec, where the finding occurred, organized educational activities with the local schools, using the discovery as a tool to teach contemporary history. Thanks to this event, various cultural and pedagogical initiatives were activated. The Nazi subway city in Norway and the weapons buried in Mendoza. During the German occupation of Norway in World War II, the Nazis established multiple military bases throughout the country. However, one of their most secret projects took place in the remote north in a mountainous region near Lakselv in Finnmark. There, in the vicinity of Banak, a strategic area due to its proximity to the Barents Sea and its natural isolation, the Third Reich's engineers built a completely self-sufficient subway city designed to operate in isolation and total secrecy. From the outside, the base was camouflaged as a simple warehouse surrounded by forests and rocky escarpments. There was nothing to suggest that beneath this icy and seemingly inhospitable landscape was a complex network of tunnels dug deep. The main access was hidden behind a metal gate concealed between wooden structures. Once inside, a system of corridors began, reinforced with steel beams and covered with insulating layers to withstand the low Arctic temperatures. The system included passageways connecting barracks, power stations, drinking water tanks, command rooms, repair shops, fuel storage chambers, kitchens, infirmaries, and internal communication rooms. Everything was designed to function without outside contact for weeks or even months at a time. Lighting was maintained by electric generators protected in shielded compartments. Ventilation was forced with ducts drawing air from the surface and filtering it to ensure breathable conditions. The subway temperature was kept stable by the natural insulation of the rock and the heat generated by the internal systems. The base was prepared to accommodate more than 200 people, soldiers, technicians, radio operators, mechanics, and support engineers. Each module had a specific function, and daily life was conducted under strict military discipline. Shifts of surveillance, equipment maintenance, and drills for possible Soviet attacks or technical failures were organized at. The occupants rarely went outside, and only did so with special permission due to the risk of being detected by Allied intelligence or Norwegian resistance groups. The main purpose of the facility was to act as a logistics and surveillance center. From there, naval movements in the Barents Sea were monitored, enemy transmissions were intercepted, and support actions for German submarines operating in the Arctic were coordinated. It also functioned as a repair shop for heavy machinery, including U-boat engines, armored vehicles adapted to the polar climate, and industrial generators. All this was carried out under the direction of the Todt organization, in charge of much of the Third Reich's military infrastructure and famous for its relentless efficiency, even in the most extreme conditions. For years, the existence of this subway city was only a rumor among some inhabitants of Finnmark. After the German retreat in 1944, much of the facility was sealed or destroyed by the Nazis themselves to avoid capture. However, in recent decades, local explorers, military archaeologists, and war history specialists have rediscovered intact sections of the complex, hidden among Arctic vegetation and frozen rubble. Tools, machine parts, moisture-damaged documents, and remnants of German uniforms have been recovered. Today, the site remains restricted for security reasons, but its existence has been confirmed by aerial photographs, geological surveys, and testimonies of former inhabitants. For historians, this base represents an extreme example of the Nazi effort to consolidate its presence in Northern Europe through technology, logistics, and absolute secrecy. It also raises questions about how many other similar structures remain hidden underground, waiting to be discovered by those still searching for the less visible traces of World War II. Much of the heavy work was done by Soviet prisoners, forced to labor in extreme conditions. Many died due to weather, cave-ins, and abuse. Materials were brought by train to Narvik, and from there by truck to the hidden entrance of the complex. The project was kept strictly confidential, and almost no civilians knew of its existence. At the end of the war, the Germans destroyed parts of the complex to prevent it from falling into Allied hands, but many tunnels and rooms were left intact. For decades, the site remained sealed and forgotten, until in the 1990s a group of local explorers rediscovered its original access. Inside, they found rusted generators, uniform remains, ammunition boxes, partial documents, and technical equipment, all in surprisingly good condition thanks to the dry climate and isolation. In 1997, Norwegian authorities conducted an official expedition. The site was mapped and documented, confirming that it was one of the most complete Nazi facilities built outside Germany. Among the documents recovered were underwater route plans, maps of the Arctic, personnel lists, and naval surveillance records. Also found was a room with lead-lined walls, possibly used to protect encrypted communications equipment or conduct experiments. The Banak subway complex was not only a fortress, it was a key strategic node for controlling Allied naval routes to the Soviet Union and coordinating operations on the Northern Front. In 2002, the Norwegian government decided to preserve part of the site as historical testimony. Although it is not yet open to the public, the possibility of converting it into a museum is being studied. Some areas remain unexplored, and visible signs of the German occupation still remain in its tunnels. In 2017, a surprising discovery occurred in the province of Mendoza, Argentina. While a group of rural workers were clearing a field near San Carlos, one of them noticed something metallic sticking out of the ground. Upon digging, they found a heavy, rusted box with unknown markings. When they opened it, they revealed an arsenal with symbols of the Third Reich. The discovery was quickly reported to the authorities, who responded with the Argentine army. Inside the box were Luger P08 and Walter P38 pistols, common models among Nazi officers, ammunition, long-range binoculars, deteriorated uniforms, and documents dating back to 1945. All the objects were wrapped in thick cloth, carefully protected from the passage of time, as if someone had planned to recover them in the future. The experts confirmed that the material was authentically German. Some documents, written in German, contained dates, names, and cross-references to historical archives. Among them were personal photographs, letters addressed to an alleged Captain Müller, and a notebook with routes, contacts, and movements within Argentina. An incomplete passport and a very deteriorated SS insignia were also found. Investigators hypothesized that this cache was hidden by a Nazi who had fled to Argentina after the end of the conflict. Between 1945 and 1950, the South American country received hundreds of fugitives from the Third Reich, and Mendoza, along with Bariloche and Córdoba, was one of the places where several of them settled. The box was buried about 60 centimeters deep near an old winery in an isolated site with no nearby buildings, suggesting it was strategically chosen. Although no further objects were found after a search with metal detectors, historians, both Argentine and German, analyzed the data for clues. The evidence pointed to a former logistics officer who had escaped from Europe via Italy and arrived in Buenos Aires in 1947, although his identity could not be definitively confirmed. This find became further evidence of the trail left by the Nazis in South America, rekindling interest in investigating the clandestine movements of ex-officials of the regime in the post-war period. Traces of the Third Reich, chests, hidden archives, and Nazi refuges in South America and Europe. According to old intelligence reports, an individual allegedly linked to Nazism had been living for more than 10 years hidden in rural areas of Argentina under a false identity. The discovery of a buried chest in the surroundings of San Carlos set off the alarms. Its contents were taken to a specialized laboratory in Buenos Aires, where they were thoroughly cleaned, catalogued, and preserved. To avoid misinterpretation or the attraction of groups with extremist ideologies, the authorities decided not to immediately exhibit the objects found. However, part of the material was given to the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires, which organized a special exhibition focused on the escape of former Nazi military personnel to South America after World War II. This discovery rekindled a latent debate: the existence of clandestine networks, known as rat lines, that allowed numerous Nazi hierarchs to flee to Latin America. These routes passed, in many cases, through Italy, crossed the Atlantic aboard undercover boats, and ended in countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, or Chile. The chest buried in a remote area was further evidence of how well planned some of these escapes were. Experts agreed that its contents had not been assembled at random. The weapons were carefully packed, the ammunition separated by type, the documents protected with sealed wrappings, and the box itself reinforced to withstand the pressure of the terrain. Everything pointed to meticulous preparation, carried out by someone with logistical knowledge and clear objectives. In parallel, the migration records of the province of Mendoza were examined. Although many records were incomplete or altered with false identities, records of German citizens who had acquired property between 1946 and 1952 were found. Several of the surnames matched the names listed in the personal notebook found inside the chest. The Argentine government chose not to reveal the exact location of the find to avoid looting or unauthorized searches, but did confirm that it was one of the most significant and best-preserved discoveries related to the Nazi presence in the country. Collaborations were even initiated with researchers from the Bicentennial Center to try to trace identities linked to the contents of the chest. The story took on an international dimension when a European media published images of the material found. As a result of this diffusion, several descendants of German immigrants in Argentina contacted the authorities, claiming to possess similar objects or documents. Some of these items were analyzed, although they could not be directly related to the chest. One of the great unknowns that persists is why the original owner of the box never returned to retrieve it. Did he die before? Did he change his plans? Although there are no definitive answers, the box remains a solid testimony of how many fugitives from the Nazi regime arrived on the continent with concrete plans, established contacts, and hidden resources. In the wake of this find, further expeditions were made in areas near San Carlos. Some neighbors recalled seeing decades ago strange vehicles without identification and men speaking German. However, no further material remains were discovered, although the interest in unearthing the area's hidden past remains. Nazi archives hidden in a French school. In 2013, another unexpected find rekindled interest in the hidden traces of Nazism in Europe. During renovation work at the Institut Lucius Braque, a secondary school located in the small town of Bugle-Balance in southeastern France, a group of workers discovered a cavity hidden behind wooden panels in the attic of the main building. What appeared to be a simple, routine architectural renovation turned into a trip back in time. Removing the weathered planks revealed a narrow, dusty space carefully sealed as if someone had deliberately concealed it. Inside lay more than 200 old documents stacked in folders, envelopes with official stamps, and loose sheets of typed and handwritten notes. The yellowed paper, folded corners, and musty smell told of their age, but much of the contents were surprisingly intact. The Institute, built in the 1930s, had been requisitioned by the Nazi occupation forces between 1943 and 1944, temporarily becoming an administrative barracks. After the German withdrawal, it was once again used as an educational center, and for decades no one imagined that such a sensitive part of the past was still hidden within its walls. The archive contained a disturbing mix of documents: reports signed by Wehrmacht and Gestapo officers, city maps with coded annotations, lists of local citizens with personal data, family photographs, metal badges, official seals, and several swastika medals. Letters written in German addressed to commanders in Lyon were also found, as well as forms with official Kommandantur stamps. Everything pointed to an operations center with a much more meticulous level of surveillance than previously thought. Some of the most revealing findings were the individual files with names of French citizens, most of them with Jewish surnames or with links to the resistance. Each card contained precise data: address, age, occupation, known movements, even notes on suspicious activities. Also recovered were sheets with inventories of confiscated goods, radios, sewing machines, bicycles, watches, all recorded with cold precision and exact dates. One of the most shocking documents was an intelligence report dated March 1944. It detailed clandestine escape routes used by the local resistance, meeting points, code names, and physical descriptions of its members. This document, previously unknown in French historical archives, revealed that the Nazi surveillance network in the region was far more sophisticated and pervasive than had been documented. Another disturbing finding was a list of students from the institute itself, with handwritten notations in the margins: father absent, brother arrested, mother under suspicion. Everything indicates that the German occupants not only used the building as a logistical center, but also maintained covert control over the families in the village, monitoring movements from the classrooms. The presence of a German portable typewriter found with the documents helped to close the circle. It still retained part of the original ribbon and was functional enough to compare the typeface with the reports found. The matches confirmed that many of the documents had been written right there, on those same walls that today house classrooms. The revelation caused a strong impact among the villagers. Some elderly people vaguely remembered seeing German soldiers in the school or hearing rumors of interrogations during the war, but no one suspected that such sensitive information had been stored there. The most widely accepted hypothesis is that a collaborating member of the regime, or even a local sympathizer, deliberately hid the archive in the last days of occupation, hoping to preserve it or prevent its capture. The Ministry of Culture, upon confirming the authenticity of the materials, ordered the immediate transfer of the archive to the Regional Conservation Center in Grenoble. There it underwent a meticulous restoration and digitization process, and part of the contents were then exhibited at the Museum of the Resistance in Lyon, in a temporary exhibition that attracted thousands of visitors. For historians, the discovery offered a new window into Nazi surveillance methods in occupied territories, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about collaboration, silence, and memory. For the villagers, it was a direct confrontation with a part of their history that had remained buried, not only physically but also in the collective consciousness. The school is still in operation, and a discreet plaque was placed on the attic where the archive was hidden to commemorate the discovery. For the new students, that dusty corner is no longer just part of the building. It is a living lesson about what can hide behind walls, and how the past, however hidden, always finds a way to come to light. A Nazi refuge in the Paraguayan jungle. In 2015, a team of archaeologists led by José Barbosa discovered the remains of a mysterious set of buildings in the jungle of San Pedro, northern Paraguay. Initially believed to be ancient rural structures, clearing the area revealed precisely carved stone walls, remains of German pottery and symbols hinting at a direct connection to Nazism. The find was located in the vicinity of Ibiqui National Park, an area of difficult access and sparsely inhabited. 3 separate structures were identified but connected by hidden trails. Although the roofs were gone, the walls were still standing and some retained inscriptions in German. The find suggests that at some point after the war, the site functioned as a clandestine shelter, possibly as part of a larger network of hideouts built by Third Reich fugitives in South America. The isolation, meticulous construction, and provenance of materials point to planning similar to that detected in other enclaves of Nazi exiles. In 2015, a group of archaeologists led by José Barbosa made a surprising find in the jungle of northern Paraguay, near Ibiqui National Park. What at first appeared to be an ancient rural construction turned out to be a set of stone buildings with clear signs of European origin and connections to the Nazi regime. Investigators found Third Reich coins, medicine bottles with labels in German, remains of small arms such as empty magazines and shell casings, as well as a swastika engraved in stone. Next to it was a rusty metal box containing mostly unreadable papers, except for one that showed a date, 1947. Everything indicated that it was a shelter built by Nazi fugitives after World War II. The structures, made with alpine architectural techniques, were not typical of the region and suggested that those who built them had advanced technical knowledge. The objects found, such as medicines and tin cans with Reich stamps, matched models manufactured in Germany between 1938 and 1944. Although the site was not suitable for a prolonged stay, it would have served as a temporary hiding place or transit point. The finding prompted a review of Paraguayan immigration files, where German names were found who arrived between 1946 and 1952, many with false documentation. Several of them had bought land near San Pedro and lived in isolation for years. The Paraguayan government, after initially maintaining silence, authorized the archaeologists to continue with the investigation, although restrictions were imposed to avoid looting. This discovery was the first with physical evidence confirming long-standing rumors of Nazi hideouts in rural areas of the country. A year earlier, in 2014, another find reignited interest in the secret projects of the Third Reich. A group of researchers led by archaeologist Andreas Sulzer discovered a network of tunnels under a former factory near St. Georgen an der Gusen in northern Austria. The area was already known for its proximity to the Mauthausen concentration camp, but geo-radar scans revealed something else: subway passages, spacious rooms, and officially unrecorded structures. There was speculation that the site may have been part of the so-called B8 Bergkristall, a top-secret project of the Nazi regime linked to the development of advanced weapons, possibly even nuclear power. The tunnels, constructed of concrete and steel, were buried under rubble as if they had been deliberately sealed. Several were more than 20 meters deep and featured unusual facilities for the time: electrical wiring, ventilation systems, and improvised laboratory-like structures. Mechanical parts, remnants of furniture, old electrical components, and symbols of the Third Reich were found carved into the walls. Although no conclusive evidence of nuclear experiments was found, The technical material and remains recovered suggested advanced research work. Part of the finds were compared with declassified Soviet intelligence files which mentioned a secret project codenamed B8 Ver Crystal related to experimental aircraft prototypes and engines. The Austrian government allowed limited excavations due to the historical value of the site and the possible presence of human remains. In 2013, workers remodeling the former Lucien Braque High School in Bugle-Balance, southeastern France, accidentally found an archive hidden behind wooden panels in the building's attic. The school, which served as German barracks between 1943 and 1944 during the occupation, was hiding more than 200 official Nazi army documents. The papers, mostly signed and stamped by German officers, included maps with annotations, lists of French citizens, many of Jewish origin or linked to the resistance, surveillance reports, records of arrests, confiscations, and letters sent to higher commands in Lyon. One of the most relevant documents was an intelligence report from March 1944, with routes used by the resistance, meeting points and physical descriptions of suspects. Also found was a list with names of school pupils and handwritten notes, suggesting a follow-up of families. The file was carefully packed and hidden, indicating that someone with access to the building deliberately concealed it before the German withdrawal. Among the artifacts was also a German-made portable typewriter, still functional, used to produce some of the documents found. The news came as a surprise to the town's residents, who were unaware of the building's military use during the war. The archive was transferred to the Regional Conservation Center in Grenoble, where it was restored and digitized. Some of the material was exhibited at the Museum of the Resistance in Lyon, giving visitors a close-up look at the workings of German intelligence and its impact on the daily lives of the occupied. Interest in the complex discovered in St. Georgen and Der Gussen, Austria, grew significantly when international media began referring to the site as an alleged buried Nazi laboratory. Although no definitive evidence was found as to its exact purpose, all signs pointed to it being a top-secret facility designed to withstand and operate in extreme conditions. The site showed surprising structural planning, interconnected rooms, well-distributed storage areas, and a considerable depth underground. Archaeologist Andreas Sulzer, leader of the project, said that some sections showed signs of intensive use until the last days of the war. The quality of the materials and the solidity of the construction suggested that the complex was designed to last. Even after Allied bombing, the tunnels remained intact, confirming that their construction was not improvised. The remote location, restricted access, and absence of official records reinforced the theory that it was a special project of the Third Reich, possibly linked to the development of experimental weaponry. Although the mystery persists, the clues found allowed opening new lines of investigation into secret Nazi technology. In 2013, a group of mountaineers exploring a little-traveled route in the Italian Alps came across metal debris poking through the snow. Upon closer examination, they discovered the fragments of a large aircraft, partially buried under ice and rocks. Italian authorities and U.S. military experts went to the site to investigate. Initial analysis identified the craft as a B-24 Liberator, a bomber used by the U.S. Air Force during World War II. A license plate still visible allowed the aircraft to be accurately tracked. It was a plane that had been missing since 1945, whose fate had remained a mystery for nearly 70 years. The bomber had taken off from a base in southern Italy, bound for Austria, on a mission against a railway installation. After crossing the Alps, all contact was lost. There were no radio signals or sighting reports, so it was classified as lost in action with all crew on board. The discovery occurred at an altitude of more than 2,500 meters in an inaccessible area exposed to extreme weather conditions. Despite the time, part of the fuselage retained its shape. The rear turret, parts of the landing gear, and the cockpit could be distinguished. Identification plates, uniforms, personal items such as a watch, a box with letters, and a military credential were also found. Bone remains found at the site were sent for genetic analysis. The US Department of Defense was able to identify 5 of the 11 crew members. Their remains were repatriated and buried with military honors. The other 6, although not fully identified, also received official burial. Part of the plane's fuselage was preserved and is now on display in an aviation museum in Italy, where a plaque with the names of the entire crew was installed. The discovery closed a painful chapter for many families who for decades did not know the fate of their loved ones. In addition, it generated a new wave of research on other missing aircraft in the region, since it is estimated that at least 10 more Allied bombers did not return from missions at the same time. These findings, far from being theories or urban legends, are tangible testimonies of the war, buried objects, forgotten structures, and documents sealed for decades. Each piece found, be it an insignia, a personal letter, a damaged machine, or a concrete wall, provides real details about how people lived and fought in one of the darkest periods of history. Many of these remains remained hidden simply because no one came back to look for them, or because terrain, time, and oblivion had covered them up. Today, their recovery shows that the past can still speak without the need for speculation. It is the evidence itself that tells the story, silently but forcefully.